Introduction to the Civil Rights Philosophies of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. DuBois. Our learning goals for this video are to provide a brief biographical sketch of the lives of Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. DuBois, to introduce each activist's philosophy on civil rights, beginning with Washington during the period of Reconstruction after the Civil War, through Du Bois's influence during the Harlem Renaissance and into the mid-20th century. And finally, to prepare you to read and study the speeches and writings of Washington and Du Bois through the perspectives of racial equality, economic advancement, education, and identity. Let's start with Booker T. Washington, who was born into slavery in 1856 near Hales Ford, Virginia, which is now West Virginia. Washington's mother, Jane, was an enslaved woman on the Burroughs plantation. Washington did not know the identity of his father, but it is rumored that his father was a member of the Burroughs family. After his mother married Washington Ferguson, who had escaped slavery, a young Booker adopted his stepfather's first name as his own last name. After the Civil War ended institutionalized enslavement, Washington and his family moved to Malden, West Virginia, where Washington worked in the coal mines. Washington's parents supported the limited education available to him in Malden, but Washington deeply desired to further his education, so he left the salt mines in 1871. Washington hoped to attend Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute, which was a college for black students run by white General Samuel Chapman Armstrong, a commander of black soldiers during the Civil War. Washington was not initially admitted to the school and worked in janitorial positions until he was eventually admitted as a student. Washington deeply admired General Armstrong and considered him one of the most important influences in his life. After graduating from Hampton, Washington continued to pursue his love for education as a teacher in Malden, and then later back at his alma mater as both a teacher and graduate student. A key turning point in Washington's life came in 1881, when General Armstrong was approached by a group of prominent citizens of Tuskegee, Alabama, seeking a recommendation of a white principal to oversee a new school for African American students. General Armstrong recommended Booker T. Washington for the role, and Washington opened the new school on July 4, 1881. Washington served as principal and president of Tuskegee Institute from 1881 until his death in 1915. By 1895, enrollment at Tuskegee was over 1,000 students, and it had become a premier institution for African American education in the United States. Washington built his reputation as a speaker and educator through lobbying the state legislature, the surrounding community, and northern philanthropists for funding for Tuskegee. He earned respect in the U.S. as well as abroad for his efforts. Washington primarily focused on agricultural and industrial education and economic development as the methods for improving the lives of African Americans in the South, an approach that was respected for its compromise and incremental progress, yet often criticized as conciliatory to whites. Washington believed that economic development would earn African Americans respect from whites, which would eventually lead to full civil and political equality. William Edward Burgard Du Bois was born in 1868 in Grand Barrington, Massachusetts, to Alfred Du Bois and Mary Sylvania Burgard. Du Bois was primarily raised by his mother. Du Bois excelled as a student and went on to study at Fisk University, an all-black college in Nashville, Tennessee. However, his dream was to study at Harvard. After graduating from Fisk, Du Bois pursued his dream of attending Harvard, where he was admitted in 1888 as a janitor. However, Du Bois went on to earn a degree in philosophy as well as a graduate degree in history by 1891. He spent some time in postgraduate study in Germany, eventually returning to Harvard, where he became the first African American to earn a doctorate from Harvard in 1896. Du Bois made a name for himself as an academic, professor, historian, anthropologist, and outspoken civil rights leader. Du Bois' academic research led to more than 16 publications on the political, economic, educational, religious, and social status of African Americans from 1898 to 1914. Du Bois' scholarship became the foundation of the academic discipline of African American studies. One of his best-known works is The Souls of Black Folk, Essays and Sketches, published in 1903. In this collection of autobiography and essays, Du Bois explores three ideas that will come to define his philosophy on civil rights. Double consciousness refers to the dual identity African Americans are forced to embrace in the United States as both Black and American. The talented tenth refers to Du Bois's belief in the importance of higher education to train the brightest and most talented for leadership. And the color line is a reference to Du Bois' declaration that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Du Bois found a role as one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Color People, or the NAACP, and served as editor for The Crisis, a newspaper published by the NAACP. According to Marcus Bruce, Du Bois displayed an unparalleled intellectual grasp of the variety and complexity of problems generated by the color line in his editorials. However, Du Bois's criticism of the NAACP in those same editorials led to his resignation from The Crisis in 1934. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington were frequently at ideological odds. Washington advocated for agricultural and industrial training for African Americans, convinced that the economic advancement would lead to the respect necessary for full rights and citizenship. However, Du Bois argued for liberal arts education and full political, social, and civil rights for African Americans. Du Bois rejected Washington's argument as, quote, social compromise and political accommodation. He was often an outspoken critic of leaders, both white and Black, who failed to meet his expectations for leadership. In fact, Du Bois was often critical of civil rights in the United States on an international stage, which led to the loss of his passport from 1952 to 1958 at the height of American anti-communist sentiment. In 1961, Du Bois moved to Ghana, where he became a citizen and lived the last years of his life. He died there in 1963 at the age of 95. As you study the primary sources from Washington and Du Bois, identify ideas related to racial equality, economic advancement, education, and identity. Then consider how these contrasting ideas are developed by Zora Neale Hurston in her essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me, and in her novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God.